You are now listening to Know Thyself, the ultimate guide to knowing your purpose. Brought to you by Reimagine Audio. The ultimate guide to knowing your purpose. Introduction. The question beneath the question. At some point in life, almost everyone asks the same question. What is my purpose? It may arise during moments of uncertainty, loss, or transition. Or it may appear quietly in moments of success, when achievement fails to bring the fulfillment it promised. However it arrives, the question carries weight. It feels important, necessary, as if answering it will finally bring clarity, direction, and peace. But what if the question itself is misunderstood? What if purpose was never something? Missing, misplaced, or hidden somewhere in the world? What if it never needed to be found at all? Most people are taught, explicitly or subtly, that purpose exists outside of them. They are encouraged to search for it in careers, relationships, roles, accomplishments, or service. And so they search, they strive, they achieve. Yet even after doing all the right things, the question often remains. This is not because they failed to find their purpose. It is because purpose was never external to begin with. Purpose is not a destination you arrive at. It is not a role you earn. It is not a title, label, or achievement. Purpose is revealed through self. Knowledge. When you do not know yourself, life feels fragmented. Emotions feel uncontrollable. Identity feels unstable. Meaning feels conditional. Purpose feels like something you are chasing because something within you feels unresolved. But when you begin to truly know yourself, beyond conditioning, beyond false beliefs, beyond inherited identities, clarity emerges. Inner conflict softens. Emotional life stabilizes. Action becomes aligned rather than forced, and purpose begins to express itself naturally. This book is not about helping you find your purpose. It is about helping you unleash it. Through self-knowledge, awareness, and alignment, what was always present becomes accessible. The search ends not because you discovered something new, but because you removed what was obscuring what was already there. This is a journey inward, and it is the most practical journey you can take. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Purpose. Almost everyone at some point in life asks the same question. What is my purpose? It may arise during moments of uncertainty, after loss, disappointment, or transition. Or it may surface quietly in moments of success, when achievement fails to deliver the fulfillment it promised. Regardless of when it appears, the question carries weight, as though something essential is missing. Yet the struggle most people experience around purpose does not come from a lack of effort. It comes from a misunderstanding. From an early age, we are conditioned to believe that purpose is something external. We are taught, directly and indirectly, that purpose is tied to productivity, roles, and outcomes. We are asked what we want to do with our lives long before we are encouraged to understand who we are. Over time, purpose becomes confused with careers, titles, relationships, status, and approval. And so the search begins outward. People chase success, believing it will give their lives meaning. They pursue relationships, hoping someone else will complete them. They collect experiences, credentials, and recognition, thinking that purpose will finally appear once they arrive at the right place or position. But even when these goals are achieved, the question often returns, sometimes stronger than before. This is the illusion of purpose. The illusion is the belief that purpose is missing and must be found. It is the assumption that meaning exists somewhere outside of you, waiting to be discovered through the right circumstance or achievement. As long as this belief remains unchallenged, purpose will always feel distant. When purpose is misunderstood, life becomes a constant pursuit. Each new accomplishment offers a temporary sense of direction, followed by another wave of uncertainty. What feels like motivation is often confusion in disguise. People stay busy but not aligned, productive but not fulfilled. The deeper issue is this: purpose cannot be sustained when it is built on an identity you do not understand. Without self-knowledge, purpose becomes fragile. It rises and falls with external conditions. When circumstances improve, purpose feels present. When circumstances decline, purpose seems lost. Emotional states become reactive instead of intentional. Life begins to feel like a roller coaster, driven by outcomes rather than awareness. This is not a personal failure. It is the natural consequence of living without an inner foundation. When you do not know yourself, your sense of meaning depends on what happens around you. Approval feels empowering. Rejection feels destabilizing. Success creates confidence. Failure creates doubt. Emotional states appear uncontrollable because they are being governed by forces outside your awareness. Over time, this external dependence creates anxiety, instability, and a persistent sense of disconnection. The tragedy is not that people ask about purpose. The tragedy is that they believe it must be found. Purpose was never lost. It does not live in a job, a title, or a role. It does not disappear when circumstances change. Purpose is not something you acquire. It is something you unleash. And what unleashes it is self-knowledge. Ancient wisdom understood this clearly. Long before modern psychology or self-help frameworks, there was a simple instruction echoed across cultures: know thyself. This was not offered as poetry or philosophy. It was given as a foundation. To know yourself is to understand the source from which your thoughts, emotions, and actions arise. It is to recognize the difference between what is conditioned and what is essential. It is to see clearly where your beliefs came from, how your identity was shaped, and which parts of you are authentic versus inherited. Without this understanding, people mistake conditioning for character. They mistake emotional reactions for truth. They mistake survival patterns for destiny. And then they attempt to build a life and a purpose on top of these misunderstandings. The result is a life spent reacting instead of creating. True purpose does not come from adding more roles to your life. It emerges when false identities dissolve. As self-knowledge deepens, inner conflict softens. Emotional reactivity gives way to emotional clarity. You stop being pushed and pulled by the world and begin living from a grounded center within yourself. This is where purpose becomes obvious, not as a grand mission assigned from outside, but as an inner alignment. Decisions feel cleaner. Actions feel more honest. Life feels less forced and more coherent. You are no longer chasing meaning. You are expressing it. Purpose, then, is not something you find at the end of a long search. It is something you recognize when the noise clears. This chapter is not meant to give you an answer to hold on to. It is meant to dissolve the assumptions that have kept the right understanding out of reach. As long as purpose is treated as something external, it will remain elusive. Once it is understood as something inherent, it becomes unavoidable. In the chapters ahead, we will move deliberately into the process of self-knowledge, examining false identities, inherited beliefs, emotional conditioning, and the patterns that keep people disconnected from their true nature. Each layer removed is not a loss, but a return. The illusion of purpose ends the moment the journey turns inward, and that is where real clarity and real freedom begins. Chapter 2. The Forgotten Command, Know Thyself. Long before purpose became a modern obsession, before careers, identities, and achievements were treated as measures of worth, there was a single instruction regarded as the foundation of wisdom: know thyself. This was not offered as inspiration, it was given as a requirement. Etched above the entrance of the Temple of Delphi, this command served as a warning as much as a guide. It suggested that without self-knowledge, no amount of external knowledge would lead to truth. Power without self-knowledge would corrupt. Action without self-knowledge would misfire. Seeking without self-knowledge would confuse. And yet, over time, this instruction was forgotten, not erased, but overshadowed. Modern culture places enormous emphasis on knowing about things. We are encouraged to accumulate information, skills, credentials, and experiences. We are taught how to operate in the world, but rarely how to understand ourselves within it. As a result, people become highly functional, yet deeply disconnected. They know what they do. They know what they own. They know how they are perceived, but they don't know themselves. To know yourself is not to memorize your preferences or recite your history. It is not to label yourself with personality types, roles, or diagnoses. Self-knowledge goes far deeper than self-description. It is the ability to observe your inner world with clarity and honesty, to recognize what is conditioned versus what is essential. Without this clarity, most people live unconsciously. They react instead of respond. They confuse emotional impulses with truth. They mistake inherited beliefs for personal values. And because they do not recognize these patterns as learned, they experience them as fixed. This is where suffering begins. When you do not know yourself, emotions feel as though they arrive uninvited and uncontrollable. A comment can ruin your day. A setback can shake your identity. Approval feels like safety. Disapproval feels like danger. Life becomes a series of emotional reactions triggered by circumstances outside your control. But this is not because emotions are powerful. It is because awareness is absent. Self-knowledge introduces space between stimulus and response. In that space, choice becomes possible. You begin to notice how thoughts arise, how beliefs shape perception, and how emotional patterns repeat themselves. Instead of being inside the emotion, you are now observing it. This shift is subtle, but it is transformative. To know yourself is to realize that much of what you experience as you is not who you are, but what you learned to be. Survival strategies formed early, beliefs adopted unconsciously, self-images reinforced through repetition. These constructs serve a purpose at one stage of life, but they quietly outlive their usefulness. Without self-knowledge, these outdated patterns run the show. People often confuse this conditioning with destiny. They say, "This is just how I am," without realizing that what they are describing is a learned response, not an immutable truth. Self-knowledge dissolves this confusion. It reveals that identity is flexible, and emotional states are not permanent conditions. This realization alone begins to restore inner authority. Knowing yourself does not mean rejecting the world or withdrawing from it. On the contrary, it allows you to engage with life more fully, without being ruled by it. When you understand your inner mechanics, the world no longer determines your emotional state. You do. And this is where purpose begins to awaken. Purpose does not appear as an instruction from outside. It emerges naturally when inner conflict fades, when false beliefs are seen for what they are, when emotional reactivity gives way to emotional literacy, when identity is no longer constructed from external approval. Purpose, then, is not something you seek. It is something that becomes obvious. When self-knowledge clears the noise. This is why the command, Know Thyself, precedes all others. Without it, ambition is misdirected. Service becomes self-sacrifice. Achievement becomes compensation. Even spirituality becomes performance. With it, life aligns. You begin to live from the inside out. Decisions feel cleaner. Desires feel more honest. Emotional states become intentional rather than accidental. You are no longer chasing meaning. You are expressing it. In the chapters ahead, we will examine the specific layers that obscure self-knowledge: false identities, conditioned beliefs, emotional habits, and inherited narratives. Each layer removed is not a loss, but a return. What remains is not something new, but something truer. The ancient command was never outdated. It was simply ignored. To know yourself is not an end point. It is the foundation upon which everything else stands. And once that foundation is restored, purpose no longer needs to be found. It is unleashed. Chapter 3. The False Self. Before you can truly know yourself, you must first recognize what you are not. Most people move through life believing they know who they are. They can describe their personality, their preferences, their strengths, and their weaknesses. They can recount their history, their achievements, and their struggles. Yet much of what they identify as me is not their true self. It is a construction. This construction is what we will call the false self. The false self is not fake in the sense of being imaginary. It is real in experience, but it is not essential. It is a psychological structure formed through conditioning, adaptation, and survival. It develops gradually, shaped by environment, authority figures, culture, and emotional experiences, especially those encountered early in life. The false self is the version of you that learned how to fit in, stay safe, gain approval, and avoid pain. From childhood onward, each of us receives subtle messages about who we are allowed to be. We learn what is praised and what is discouraged. We learn which emotions are acceptable and which ones should be hidden. We learn when love feels conditional and when it feels secure. In response, we adapt. These adaptations are intelligent. They help us survive socially and emotionally. But over time, what begins as a strategy quietly hardens into identity. The child who learns that approval comes through achievement becomes the adult who believes their worth depends on success. The child who learns that vulnerability is unsafe becomes the adult who disconnects from emotion. The child who learns that love must be earned becomes the adult who overgives or overperforms. None of these patterns are wrong, but none of them are the true self. The false self is built on beliefs, many of which were never consciously chosen. Beliefs about worth, safety, love, power, and identity. Once these beliefs take root, they begin to operate automatically. Thoughts arise from them. Emotions are triggered by them. Behavior follows accordingly. And because these patterns feel familiar, they feel true. This is where confusion begins. When people say, "This is just how I am," they are often describing a conditioned pattern, not an essential truth. The false self thrives on repetition. The more a belief is reinforced, the more invisible it becomes. Eventually, it no longer feels like something you have. It feels like something you are. But here is the critical distinction. What is learned can be unlearned. The false self depends on unconsciousness. It survives when patterns go unexamined. It maintains control by convincing you that it is permanent. Self-knowledge interrupts this illusion. The moment you begin to observe your thoughts, instead of automatically believing them, a shift occurs. The moment you notice emotional reactions without immediately identifying with them, space opens. Awareness creates separation, and separation restores choice. This is not about rejecting the false self with judgment. That would only create another layer of conflict. The false self dissolves not through force, but through understanding. When seen clearly, it loses its authority. Knowing yourself means recognizing that you are the awareness behind the thoughts, not the thoughts themselves. You are the observer of emotions, not the emotion in the moment. The false self lives in reaction. The true self lives in awareness. This distinction changes everything. When you identify with the false self, emotions feel overwhelming because they are experienced as you. Fear becomes identity. Anger becomes justification. Sadness becomes definition. But when you recognize yourself as the awareness experiencing these states, emotions become information instead of commands. This is the beginning of emotional mastery. The false self is always externally oriented. It looks outward for validation, security, and meaning. It compares. It competes. It seeks approval. It fears rejection. It is constantly measuring itself against the world. The true self does none of these things. The true self is not reactive. It is present. It does not need to be defended, enhanced, or proven. It is steady beneath changing circumstances. It doesn't disappear when roles change or achievements fade. This is why purpose cannot be accessed through the false self. If your identity is built on conditioning, then purpose will feel conditional. It will depend on outcomes. It will fluctuate with success and failure. It will feel earned one moment and lost the next. But when identity shifts from the false self to the true self, purpose stabilizes. Purpose is no longer something you perform. It becomes something you express. This is also why shedding false beliefs is not a loss. It is a liberation. Each belief that falls away removes a layer of distortion between you and yourself. What remains is not emptiness, but clarity. The fear many people feel around self-examination comes from the assumption that without their beliefs, roles, and narratives, there will be nothing left. In truth, what remains is something far more stable than any identity constructed from the outside. It is presence. It is awareness. It is self-knowledge. And from this place, purpose begins to move freely. In the next chapter, we will look more closely at how the false self keeps emotional states out of conscious control, and how reclaiming awareness transforms emotional life from chaos into clarity. The false self must be seen before it can be released. And once it is released, the path forward becomes unmistakably clear. Chapter 4. Emotional slavery versus emotional mastery. One of the clearest signs that a person does not truly know themselves is the belief that emotions are uncontrollable. When emotions seem to arrive without permission and dictate behavior, life begins to feel unstable. Moods shift suddenly. Reactions feel automatic. Inner peace appears conditional. This state is what we will call emotional slavery. Emotional slavery is not a dramatic term. It is an accurate one. It describes a condition in which emotional states are governed by external events rather than internal awareness. A comment, a circumstance, a memory, or an expectation triggers an emotional response, and the individual follows wherever that emotion leads. When this happens repeatedly, emotions become rulers instead of messengers. Most people do not question this arrangement. They assume emotions are something that happen to them, not something they participate in creating. They say things like, "I can't help how I feel," or "that situation made me angry," without realizing the belief embedded in those statements. The belief is this: emotions are caused by the world. This belief quietly removes responsibility and hands power away. In truth, emotions are internal experiences shaped by perception, belief, memory, and interpretation. The same event can produce entirely different emotional responses in different people. This alone reveals that emotions are not caused by circumstances, but by the meaning assigned to them. Without self-knowledge, this process remains unconscious. When a person does not understand their inner mechanics, emotions appear sudden and overwhelming. Fear arises and is mistaken for danger. Anger arises and is mistaken for truth. Sadness arises and is mistaken for identity. The individual becomes entangled in emotional reactions, unable to separate. Awareness from experience. This is emotional slavery. Emotional mastery begins the moment awareness enters the process. Awareness does not eliminate emotion. It transforms the relationship to it. Instead of being inside the emotion, you begin to observe it. Instead of reacting immediately, you notice what is happening internally. This creates a crucial pause, and within that pause, choice becomes available. Self-knowledge makes this possible. When you know yourself, you begin to recognize emotional patterns. You see which emotions arise frequently and under what conditions. You notice how certain beliefs trigger predictable responses. You begin to understand the emotional habits that have been running automatically for years. This understanding weakens their grip. Emotional mastery is not suppression. Suppression is denial, and denial strengthens what it tries to hide. Mastery is recognition without identification. You allow the emotion to be present without allowing it to take control. This distinction is subtle but essential. An emotion experienced consciously passes through. An emotion resisted or acted out unconsciously lingers. This is why emotional avoidance creates long-term suffering, while emotional awareness creates freedom. The false self thrives on emotional reactivity. It depends on unexamined responses to maintain its authority. When emotions are automatic, the false self remains in control. When emotions are observed, the false self loses influence. This is why emotional mastery is inseparable from self-knowledge. Once awareness is established, something remarkable happens. Emotional states stop being random. You begin to see that emotions can be influenced deliberately, not forced, but guided, not denied, but directed. This is where many people misunderstand the idea of emotional creation. They attempt to override emotions with positive thinking, affirmations, or willpower. This often fails because it ignores the underlying beliefs generating the emotion. True emotional mastery works from the inside out. You identify the belief behind the emotion. You question its validity. You replace unconscious interpretation with conscious understanding. As beliefs shift, emotional states follow naturally. Over time, this practice restores inner authority. You no longer wait for circumstances to improve before you feel grounded. You no longer hand your emotional state to other people's behavior. You no longer live at the mercy of external events. This does not mean you become emotionally numb. On the contrary, emotional range deepens. You experience emotions more fully, but they no longer destabilize you. You feel without being consumed. This shift changes how purpose is experienced. When emotions are reactive, purpose feels fragile. A setback can derail it. A failure can erase it. But when emotional mastery is present, purpose becomes stable. It is no longer tied to mood or circumstance. It becomes an expression of inner alignment rather than an outcome-dependent state. Emotional mastery restores freedom. Freedom from impulsive reactions. Freedom from emotional dependence. Freedom from the roller coaster of external living. And with freedom comes clarity. In the next chapter, we will examine how emotional slavery is reinforced by external living, and how reclaiming internal authority brings life back into balance. Emotions were never meant to rule you. They were meant to inform you. And once you understand that difference, mastery becomes not only possible, but natural. Chapter 5. The roller coaster of external living. When emotions are governed by circumstances, life becomes unpredictable. Inner stability rises and falls based on events, opinions, outcomes, and conditions outside one's control. This pattern is so common that many accept it as normal, never realizing that it represents a deeply conditioned way of living. This is what external living looks like. External living occurs when your inner state depends on what happens around you. When things go well, you feel confident and optimistic. When things go poorly, doubt and discouragement set in. Praise lifts you up. Criticism pulls you down. Success creates momentum. Failure creates hesitation. Life begins to resemble a roller coaster. Periods of emotional highs, followed by sudden drops. At first, this may seem unavoidable. After all, circumstances do affect us. But the issue is not that life presents challenges. The issue is that meaning, identity, and emotional well-being have been outsourced to the external world. When this happens, control is quietly surrendered. External living trains the mind to look outward for regulation, instead of asking, "What is happening within me?" The focus becomes, "What just happened out there?" Instead of cultivating inner awareness, attention is constantly pulled toward people, events, and outcomes. Over time, this creates dependency. The external world becomes the emotional thermostat. Other people's moods influence your own. Situations dictate your sense of peace. Expectations determine satisfaction. And because the external world is inherently unstable, inner stability becomes impossible. This instability is often mistaken for sensitivity or realism. People say they are simply responding to life as it is. In truth, they are reacting unconsciously, unaware that their emotional experience is being shaped by interpretation rather than necessity. External living is reinforced by the false self. The false self requires feedback, It measures itself against others. It seeks validation, recognition, and reassurance. When these are present, it feels secure. When they are absent, it feels threatened. This constant evaluation keeps attention focused outward and prevents deeper self-awareness from developing. As long as identity is externally referenced, emotional reactions remain automatic. This pattern affects every area of life. In relationships, external living leads to emotional dependence. Partners become sources of validation, or insecurity. Emotional balance rises and falls with the relationship's dynamics. Love becomes conditional, not because it is intended to be, but because inner stability has not yet been reclaimed. In work and ambition, external living ties self-worth to performance. Achievement brings temporary confidence. Setbacks trigger self-doubt. Motivation becomes fueled by fear of failure rather than clarity of purpose. Even in spirituality and personal growth, external living can persist. Practices become performances. Insight becomes something to display. Growth becomes something to prove. Instead of deepening awareness, the search becomes another way to seek validation. The cost of external living is subtle but cumulative. Anxiety increases because control is never guaranteed. Frustration grows because outcomes cannot be predicted. Emotional exhaustion sets in because constant reaction requires effort. Life feels busy, but not grounded. Most people assume this is simply how life works. It is not. External living is a learned orientation, not an inevitable one. It is the result of unexamined conditioning and misplaced authority, and it can be reversed. The alternative is internal living. Internal living does not mean withdrawal from the world. It means establishing an inner reference point that remains steady regardless of circumstances. It means understanding that while events occur externally, experience is created internally. When internal authority is restored, emotions no longer depend on outcomes. They respond to understanding. You still experience disappointment, joy, challenge, and success, but none of these define you or destabilize you. This shift begins with awareness. You start to notice when your emotional state changes in response to something external. You observe the impulse to seek reassurance, approval, or control. Instead of following the impulse, you pause and ask, what belief is being activated right now? This question alone begins to dismantle the roller coaster. As awareness grows, reactions slow. Emotional responses become more measured. You recognize that peace does not come from arranging the world correctly, but from relating to it consciously. Over time, internal living creates a sense of groundedness that does not fluctuate wildly. Confidence becomes quieter but stronger. Purpose becomes steadier. Identity becomes less fragile. This is where purpose stabilizes. Purpose cannot thrive on a roller coaster. It requires inner coherence. When you are no longer being pulled in multiple emotional directions, energy consolidates. Clarity increases. Action becomes intentional rather than reactive. You stop chasing meaning through circumstances and begin expressing it through alignment. The external world does not need to change for this shift to occur. What changes is where authority resides. When authority moves inward, the world loses its power to dictate your inner state. This is not indifference, it is maturity. Internal living restores freedom, not freedom from life, but freedom within it. You engage fully without being consumed. You participate without being destabilized. You act without needing constant confirmation. The roller coaster slows, then stops. In the next chapter, we will explore how deeply ingrained beliefs keep people anchored to external living, and how identifying and releasing those beliefs opens the door to sustained inner stability. External living was learned. Internal living can be reclaimed. And once it is, life begins to move in a very different way. Chapter 6. Shedding False Beliefs. Every emotion you experience, every reaction you have, and every limitation you feel is rooted in belief. Not belief in the religious sense, but belief as internal agreement. Ideas accepted as truth, often without conscious examination. Most people live their lives governed by beliefs they did not choose. These beliefs are absorbed early, reinforced repeatedly, and rarely questioned. They are inherited from parents, culture, education, religion, and personal experience. Over time, they form an internal framework through which reality is interpreted. And because this framework operates quietly, it feels natural. But natural does not mean true. False beliefs are not lies told deliberately. They are assumptions accepted unconsciously. Beliefs about worth, identity, capability, safety, love, and possibility. Once installed, they shape perception automatically. Thoughts arise from them, emotions follow, behavior confirms them, and the cycle repeats. This is how limitation sustains itself. A belief such as, "I am not enough," may never be spoken aloud, yet it quietly influences choices, relationships, and emotional states. A belief such as, "Life is a struggle," becomes a lens through which challenges are interpreted as proof rather than circumstance. A belief such as, "I must earn love," turns connection into performance. None of these beliefs are facts. They are conclusions, and conclusions can be revisited. False beliefs persist because they feel familiar. Familiarity creates comfort, even when the belief itself is painful. The mind prefers what it knows over what is unknown. As a result, people often defend beliefs that limit them, mistaking familiarity for truth. Self-knowledge interrupts this pattern. When awareness turns inward, beliefs become visible. Instead of assuming a thought is true, you begin to question its origin. Where did this belief come from? When did I first accept it? Is it still valid? These questions weaken false beliefs. Beliefs lose power when they are examined. They depend on invisibility to survive. Once brought into conscious awareness, they begin to dissolve, not through force, but through clarity. This process is not about replacing negative beliefs with positive ones. That approach often fails because it treats symptoms rather than causes. True transformation comes from recognizing that beliefs are interpretations, not reality itself. When you see a belief as something you have rather than something you are, freedom emerges. Shedding false beliefs is not an act of destruction. It is an act of discernment. You are not losing anything essential. You are releasing what never truly belonged to you. As beliefs fall away, emotional patterns shift naturally. Fear loses intensity when the belief supporting it is questioned. Shame softens when its origin is understood. Anxiety diminishes when the assumption behind it is exposed. This is why emotional mastery depends on belief awareness. Emotions do not arise randomly. They are responses to meaning. Change the meaning, and the emotion changes with it. This is not manipulation. It is understanding. Many people fear examining their beliefs because they worry it will destabilize them. In truth, false beliefs are what create instability. They distort perception and keep the inner world in conflict. Clarity restores stability. As false beliefs dissolve, identity becomes lighter. You no longer carry the weight of stories that require constant defense. You stop proving, protecting, and performing. Energy previously spent maintaining false narratives becomes available for presence and creation. This is where purpose begins to move freely. Purpose cannot be unleashed through a belief system that contradicts your true nature. Limiting beliefs create friction between who you are and how you live. Removing them restores coherence. This process takes honesty, not harsh judgment, but gentle truthfulness. You must be willing to see what is there without immediately trying to fix it. Awareness itself does much of the work. Each belief examined brings you closer to yourself. Shedding false beliefs is not a one-time event. It is a practice. Beliefs formed over years do not vanish overnight, but each moment of awareness weakens their grip. Each insight restores inner authority. Eventually, a shift occurs. You begin to trust your own perception. You stop outsourcing meaning. You recognize that beliefs are tools, not truths, and tools can be changed when they no longer serve. What remains after false beliefs fall away is not emptiness. It is clarity. It is presence. It is a sense of inner alignment that doesn't depend on circumstance. And from this place, purpose does not need to be discovered. It expresses itself naturally. In the next chapter, we will explore how this internal clarity changes the way you relate to life itself, how purpose transitions from an idea into lived expression. False beliefs obscure. Self-knowledge reveals. And once revealed, what was always there can finally move. Chapter 7. Returning to your true essence. When false beliefs begin to fall away, something quiet but profound is revealed. Beneath the layers of conditioning, habits, and borrowed identities, there is a presence that does not struggle, perform, or defend itself. This presence has always been there, waiting not to be found, but to be recognized. This is your true essence. Returning to your true essence is not about becoming someone new. It is about releasing what was added. It is not a process of acquisition, but of subtraction. Each false belief shed, each conditioned identity loosened, brings you closer to what remains when nothing false is left to maintain. The true essence is not loud. It does not announce itself. It does not seek validation or recognition. It is steady beneath changing thoughts and emotions. It is the awareness that notices experience without being consumed by it. Many people mistake this stillness for emptiness or passivity. In truth, it is the source of clarity, creativity, and power. Action that arises from this place is not forced. It is aligned. When you are identified with the false self, effort dominates. Life feels heavy. Decisions feel pressured. You are constantly adjusting to feedback, navigating approval and rejection, success and failure. But as you return to your true essence, this effort softens. You stop resisting who you are. The true essence does not need to prove itself. It does not compete or compare. It does not rely on external conditions to feel whole. Because of this, it is inherently stable. Stability does not mean stagnation. It means coherence. From this place, Emotions are experienced fully without becoming identity. Thoughts arise and pass without attachment. Circumstances change without destabilizing the inner world. You remain present, engaged, and responsive rather than reactive. This is not detachment from life. It is intimacy with life, without entanglement. Returning to your true essence also restores intuition. When false beliefs dominated, perception was filtered through fear, expectation, and habit. Intuition was drowned out by mental noise. As clarity returns, so does a natural sense of inner guidance. Decisions begin to feel simpler. Not because life has fewer options, but because alignment narrows the field. What is not true for you becomes obvious. What is true no longer requires justification. You move forward with quiet confidence rather than anxious urgency. This is where purpose begins to feel lived rather than conceptual. Purpose expressed from the true essence does not feel like obligation. It feels like coherence. You are no longer asking what you should do. You are responding to what naturally wants to be expressed through you. This expression varies from person to person. For some, it manifests as creation. For others, as service. For others, as leadership, presence, or transformation of their environment. The form is secondary. The source is what matters. When the source is true, expression flows. Returning to your true essence also changes how you relate to others. Relationships become less transactional and more authentic. You stop seeking validation and begin offering presence. You listen more deeply. You speak more honestly. Connection becomes cleaner, freer, and less burdened by expectation. Conflict loses its grip. You no longer need to defend an identity or protect a story. Disagreement does not threaten your sense of self. Feedback becomes information rather than judgment. This emotional maturity emerges naturally when identity is no longer fragile. The true essence does not disappear under pressure. It remains accessible in success and failure alike. Many people fear that without their conditioning, they will lose motivation or ambition. In reality, the opposite occurs. Motivation becomes intrinsic. Action becomes self-directed rather than driven by fear or approval. Energy increases because it is no longer divided. Life becomes less about striving and more about expressing. This is not a mystical achievement reserved for a few. It is a return available to anyone willing to let go of what is false. The true essence is not hidden. It is overshadowed. Awareness clears the obstruction. You do not create the true essence. You remember it. And once remembered, something shifts permanently. Even when old patterns reappear, they no longer fully convince you. You recognize them as habits, not identity. You return to center more quickly. Stability becomes the norm rather than the exception. This return marks a turning point. In the next chapter, we will explore how living from this true essence transforms emotional life, from management into conscious creation. How emotions become states you participate in shaping rather than conditions you endure. Returning to your true essence is not the end of the journey. It is the foundation from which the rest unfolds. And from this foundation, purpose moves effortlessly. Chapter 8. Conscious creation of emotional states. When you return to your true essence, something profound becomes clear. Emotions are not enemies to be managed, nor forces to be feared. They are internal states that can be understood, influenced, and consciously cultivated. This realization marks a major shift. Most people believe emotions simply happen. Happiness arrives when circumstances are favorable. Anxiety appears when uncertainty arises. Peace feels dependent on things going a certain way. In this model, emotional life is reactive by default. But once self-knowledge is restored, this assumption begins to collapse. You discover that emotions are not imposed by the world. They are generated by interpretation. What you feel is shaped by what you believe, what you focus on, and how you relate to your experience. This does not mean emotions are imaginary. It means they are participatory. And participation changes everything. Conscious creation of emotional states does not mean pretending to feel something you do not. It does not mean suppressing discomfort or forcing positivity. Those approaches create internal conflict and deepen disconnection. True emotional creation begins with awareness. You first notice what you are feeling without judgment. Then you notice why. Every emotional state has a context. It is connected to meaning, memory, expectation, or belief. When you understand this connection, emotion becomes intelligible rather than overwhelming. From this place, choice becomes available. Instead of being swept into an emotional state unconsciously, you begin to relate to it intentionally. You ask different questions. You shift focus. You adjust interpretation. These subtle changes alter the emotional landscape naturally. Emotion follows attention. Where attention goes, emotional energy flows. When attention is scattered or fixated on threat, lack, or comparison, emotional states reflect that orientation. When attention is grounded, present, and aligned, emotions settle. This is not manipulation. It is literacy. Emotional literacy is the ability to read, understand, and work with emotional experience. Just as literacy with language allows you to communicate clearly, emotional literacy allows you to live clearly. Without it, emotions feel chaotic. With it, emotions become informative. As this literacy develops, you begin to notice that certain emotional states can be cultivated deliberately. Calm can be accessed through presence. Gratitude can be accessed through perspective. Confidence can be accessed through alignment. These states are not dependent on external change. They are generated internally. This is what it means to consciously create emotional states. Creation does not imply effort. It implies alignment. When beliefs shift, emotions follow. When focus changes, feeling changes. When interpretation softens, the nervous system responds. This process restores agency. You are no longer waiting for permission to feel grounded. You are no longer postponing peace until conditions improve. Emotional states become expressions of inner authority rather than reactions to circumstance. This ability fundamentally alters how purpose is lived. When emotions are reactive, purpose is inconsistent. Inspiration comes and goes. Motivation fluctuates. Confidence rises and falls. But when emotional states are consciously cultivated, purpose becomes steady. You act from clarity rather than compulsion. Even difficult emotions are experienced differently. Sadness is felt without collapse. Anger is acknowledged without aggression. Fear is noticed without paralysis. Emotional range remains, but emotional dominance disappears. This creates resilience. Resilience is not toughness. It is flexibility. It is the capacity to experience emotion without losing center. It is the ability to move through challenge without becoming defined by it. From this place, creativity expands. When emotions are no longer suppressive or overwhelming, energy becomes available. Ideas flow more freely. Insight deepens. Expression becomes more authentic. You stop managing emotion and begin working with it. This shift also affects how you relate to the future. Anticipation no longer generates anxiety by default. Expectation becomes open rather than tense. You trust your ability to meet experience because you are no longer dependent on outcomes for emotional regulation. This is freedom. Freedom does not mean the absence of emotion. It means the presence of choice. As conscious emotional creation becomes integrated, something subtle happens. Life feels less reactive and more responsive. You are no longer bracing against experience. You are engaging with it. Purpose expresses itself naturally in this state. When emotions are aligned, action follows without friction. You do not force yourself to move forward. Movement arises organically. Purpose stops feeling like a question and starts feeling like momentum. In the next chapter, we will explore how this inner alignment transforms thinking itself, how thought becomes constructive, intentional, and oriented toward desired outcomes rather than conditioned limitations. Emotions no longer control the direction of your life. They become part of the intelligence guiding it. And when emotion, thought, and awareness align, purpose unfolds with clarity and ease. Chapter 9. Purpose Revealed. When self-knowledge deepens, false beliefs loosen, emotional states become conscious, and inner stability is restored, something unexpected happens. The question of purpose begins to lose its urgency, not because it has been answered intellectually, but because it has been outgrown. What once felt like a problem to solve now feels like a truth unfolding naturally. Purpose does not arrive with fanfare. It reveals itself quietly, through alignment. This is the moment many people miss. They expect purpose to appear as a specific instruction. Do this. Become that. Go there. But purpose is not a command issued from outside. It is a state that becomes evident when internal conflict dissolves. Purpose is revealed when who you are and how you live are no longer in contradiction. When life is lived from the false self, purpose feels fragmented. You may feel pulled in multiple directions, unsure which desire is authentic and which is conditioned. Motivation fluctuates. Inspiration comes in waves and disappears just as quickly. But when you live from your true essence, purpose stabilizes. You are no longer asking what you should do to be worthy. You are responding to what naturally wants to express itself through you. Action arises from coherence rather than pressure. This is a critical shift. Purpose is not something added to your life. It is something uncovered within it. As awareness increases, clarity sharpens. You begin to notice patterns. What energizes you, what drains you, what feels aligned, and what feels forced. These signals were always present, but they were drowned out by noise, expectation, fear, comparison, and conditioning. With the noise gone, the signal becomes unmistakable. Purpose revealed does not mean life becomes simple or effortless. Challenges remain. Growth continues. But there is a sense of rightness beneath movement. Even difficulty feels meaningful rather than disorienting. This is because purpose is no longer dependent on outcome. When purpose is tied to results, it feels fragile. Success validates it. Failure threatens it. But when purpose is rooted in alignment, action itself becomes fulfilling. You are not acting to become something. You are acting because expression feels natural. This distinction changes how you measure your life. You stop asking, "Did this work?" and begin asking, "Was this true?" You stop evaluating yourself through comparison and begin evaluating through integrity. Purpose revealed is not about doing more. It is about doing what is congruent. This congruence creates a sense of internal peace that does not require explanation. You are no longer at war with yourself. Decisions may still carry weight, but they are made from clarity rather than confusion. Others may notice the change before you do. When purpose is revealed, presence deepens. You listen more fully. You speak more deliberately. You move with intention. Your energy feels grounded rather than scattered. People experience you as authentic, not because you are trying to be, but because you are no longer performing. This authenticity is magnetic. Purpose expressed from the true self does not seek attention, yet it naturally draws connection. Service becomes genuine rather than compensatory. Leadership emerges without force. Creativity flows without strain. And importantly, purpose revealed does not look the same for everyone. For some, it expresses as building, teaching, or creating. For others, it expresses as healing, guiding, or supporting. For others, still, it expresses as presence, bringing clarity and steadiness into every environment they enter. The form varies, the essence does not. Purpose is not defined by what you do, but by how you do it, and from where it arises. This understanding frees you from comparison. You no longer measure your purpose against someone else's expression. You recognize that alignment looks different depending on temperament, circumstance, and calling. Comparison dissolves when purpose is internalized. Another shift occurs at this stage. Patience. When purpose is misunderstood, urgency dominates. People feel behind. They rush. They force progress. But when purpose is revealed as alignment rather than destination, timing becomes less anxious. You trust the unfolding. You act when movement is present and rest when it is not. This trust does not create passivity. It creates precision. You stop scattering energy across options that do not resonate. Focus sharpens naturally. Momentum builds without strain. Life begins to feel cooperative rather than resistant. Purpose, once revealed, does not need constant reinforcement. It is self-sustaining because it is rooted in truth rather than validation. You are no longer trying to become purposeful. You are living purposefully. In the next chapter, we will explore how this inner alignment reshapes daily life, how purpose moves from understanding into consistent expression through thought, speech, and action. Purpose revealed is not the end of the journey. It is the moment the journey becomes coherent. And from coherence, everything else follows. Chapter 10. Living from the inside out. Once purpose is revealed, life begins to reorganize itself around a new center. This shift is not dramatic or sudden, but it is unmistakable. The axis of decision-making moves inward. Instead of responding to the world first and yourself second, you begin responding to yourself first, and then engaging the world from that clarity. This is what it means to live from the inside out. Living from the inside out does not require withdrawing from life. It requires reorienting authority. Your inner state becomes the reference point. Thoughts, emotions, and values guide action. rather than pressure, expectation, or circumstance. Before this shift, life often feels reactive. You respond to emails, conversations, demands, and events as they arise. Energy is fragmented. Attention is scattered. Decisions are made quickly, often to relieve discomfort rather than to express truth. But when inner alignment is restored, this pattern changes. You begin to pause before reacting. You notice what feels aligned and what feels forced. Instead of asking what will bring approval or security, you ask what reflects clarity and integrity. This pause is subtle, but it is powerful. It turns reaction into response. Living from the inside out also changes how you think. Thoughts become more constructive. Instead of rehearsing fears or replaying past events, the mind becomes oriented toward coherence. You think from desired states rather than from problems. This does not mean ignoring challenges. It means addressing them. Without emotional distortion, your internal dialogue shifts. Self-talk becomes supportive rather than critical. Inner conflict softens. You stop arguing with yourself and start cooperating with yourself. This cooperation creates momentum. Action feels cleaner, less resisted. This shift affects daily life in practical ways. In work, you no longer operate solely from urgency. You act with intention. Productivity becomes focused rather than frantic. You choose where to invest energy instead of responding to everything equally. In relationships, communication becomes more honest and less defensive. You express boundaries without guilt. You listen without needing to control the outcome. Presence replaces performance. In decision-making, clarity replaces overthinking. You trust your inner sense of direction. Even when decisions are difficult, they feel clean rather than conflicted. Living from the inside out also transforms how you experience challenges. Challenges no longer feel like threats to identity. They become situations to navigate. You remain grounded even when outcomes are uncertain. Emotional resilience deepens because your sense of self is no longer tied to external validation. This internal grounding creates consistency. You become less influenced by trends, opinions, or pressure. You move at your own pace. You stop comparing your path to others. Alignment becomes more important than speed. Purpose expresses itself through this consistency. When you live from the inside out, purpose is no longer something you think about. It is something you embody. It shows up in how you speak, how you choose, how you respond. It is woven into everyday actions rather than reserved for grand moments. This embodiment creates credibility. People sense when someone is aligned. There's less effort, less contradiction. Words and actions match. This coherence builds trust without explanation. Influence becomes natural rather than forced. Another important change occurs: responsibility. Living from the inside out means taking responsibility for your inner world. You no longer blame circumstances for emotional states. You recognize where interpretation is shaping experience. This responsibility is not heavy. It is liberating. It restores choice. As responsibility increases, so does freedom. You are no longer waiting for the world to change before you feel centered. You bring center with you. This changes how you move through environments, conversations, and transitions. Over time, this way of living becomes the default. Old reactive patterns may still arise, but they no longer dominate. You return to alignment more quickly. Awareness becomes your anchor. Living from the inside out is not perfection. It is presence. Presence allows you to meet life as it is without losing yourself. It allows you to act with clarity without needing certainty. It allows purpose to remain expressed even when conditions fluctuate. In the next chapter, we will explore how this internal orientation naturally expands into service, how purpose expressed inwardly becomes contribution outwardly without self-loss or sacrifice. Living from the inside out is the bridge. It turns knowing into being. And from being, purpose moves freely. Chapter 11. Service without self-loss. When purpose is lived from the inside out, it naturally extends beyond the self. This extension is often misunderstood. Many people equate service with sacrifice, believing that to contribute meaningfully, they must diminish themselves. This belief has caused countless individuals to burn out, resent, or abandon their own well-being in the name of helping others. True service does not require self-loss. It requires self-knowledge. Service that arises from the false self seeks validation. It attempts to earn worth through giving. It overextends, overcompensates, and over-identifies with being needed. This form of service is unstable because it is driven by lack rather than alignment. When the source is unclear, giving becomes draining. But when service arises from the true essence, it feels natural and sustainable. You give not to fill a void, but to express coherence. You contribute not because you must, but because it is a natural extension of who you are. This distinction changes everything. Service without self-loss begins with inner fullness. When your emotional states are consciously created and your identity is internally referenced, you are no longer dependent on external validation. You do not give to be seen. You give because expression feels right. This form of service has boundaries. Boundaries are not barriers. They are clarity. They allow service to remain clean rather than entangled. When boundaries are present, given does not create resentment. It doesn't exhaust. It doesn't require repayment. You know when to engage and when to step back. You recognize that rest is not selfish. It is necessary for sustainability. Service without self-loss also honors individuality. You do not impose your purpose onto others. You recognize that each person has their own path of self-knowledge and awakening. You offer support, guidance, or presence without attachment to outcome. This allows others to retain their agency. True service empowers rather than rescues. It invites rather than insists. It respects autonomy. This respect creates deeper impact than force ever could. Living from the inside out makes this possible because your identity is no longer tied to being needed. You are free to serve without ego involvement. Praise does not inflate you. Lack of recognition does not discourage you. The act of service itself is fulfilling. This freedom creates consistency. Service becomes a way of being rather than an effortful role. It shows up in listening, in patience, in honesty, and in presence. It doesn't always look dramatic or heroic. Often, it is quiet and unrecognized, but it is powerful. Service without self-loss also prevents burnout. Burnout occurs when energy is given from depletion rather than alignment. When you give from inner clarity, energy circulates. Giving does not drain, it renews. This renewal is not mystical, it is practical. When actions align with values and identity, the nervous system remains regulated. Emotional balance is preserved. You remain present rather than exhausted. Purpose expressed through service is not about saving the world. It is about showing up fully where you are. This may express through teaching, creating, leading, or supporting. It may express through presence in everyday interactions. The scale does not determine the value. Alignment does. Service becomes authentic when it is not used to escape self-work. It complements self-knowledge rather than replacing it. You continue to observe your inner world, even as you contribute outwardly. This ongoing awareness keeps service clean. When inner authority is intact, service does not distort identity. You remain yourself regardless of how much you give. You do not disappear into roles. You do not abandon your needs. You remain whole. This is the balance many seek but rarely achieve. Service without self-loss is not learned through instruction. It emerges naturally when self-knowledge is established. When you know yourself, you know where you end and others begin. This clarity allows connection without confusion. In the final chapter, we will bring everything together, returning to the central truth that knowing yourself is not one purpose among many, but the foundation from which all purpose flows. Service is not the destination, it is the expression. And when expressed without self-loss, it becomes one of the clearest signatures of a life lived in alignment. Chapter 12. The Ultimate Purpose. At the end of every search, every question, and every attempt to define meaning, one truth remains. The ultimate purpose is to know yourself, not as a concept, not as an idea, but as a lived reality. Everything else that people call purpose, careers, missions, roles, achievements, service, flows from this knowing. Without it, purpose feels borrowed, conditional, and unstable. With it, purpose becomes inherent, steady, and self-sustaining. This is where the journey completes its circle. In the beginning, the question, "What is my purpose?" feels urgent, even desperate. It carries the weight of uncertainty and longing. But by now, it should be clear that the question itself was pointing inward all along. The question was never asking, "What should I do?" It was asking, "Who am I?" When you do not know yourself, life feels fragmented. Identity is assembled from roles. Emotions are dictated by circumstance. Beliefs inherited unconsciously shape behavior. Purpose feels like something missing because the self has been obscured. But when self-knowledge is restored, that sense of lack dissolves. Knowing yourself brings coherence. Thoughts, emotions, and actions begin to align. You stop living in contradiction. Inner conflict softens. Energy consolidates. Life feels simpler, not because it has fewer challenges, but because you are no longer divided within yourself. This is the foundation of all purpose. The ultimate purpose is not to become something extraordinary. It is to become undivided. From this undivided state, expression happens naturally. You create because creativity wants to move. You serve because presence wants to extend. You lead because clarity invites responsibility. None of this is forced. None of it is performed. It is lived. When you know yourself, you no longer need to ask permission to exist as you are. You no longer need external validation to confirm your worth. You no longer need circumstances to be perfect in order to feel centered. You carry center with you. This is freedom. Freedom does not mean unlimited choice. It means clarity of choice. You know what is aligned and what is not. You know when to act and when to pause. You know when to engage and when to step back. Life becomes navigable without constant doubt. This clarity does not make you rigid. It makes you responsive. Knowing yourself also restores humility. You recognize that self-knowledge is not a destination, but a relationship. Awareness deepens over time. Layers continue to reveal themselves. Growth remains ongoing, but it is no longer frantic. You are not trying to fix yourself. You are learning yourself. This learning brings compassion, not only for yourself, but for others. You see how conditioning shapes behavior. You recognize fear beneath reaction. You meet people with understanding rather than judgment. This compassion does not weaken you. It strengthens your presence. The ultimate purpose is not something you complete. It is something you live. Every day becomes an opportunity to return to awareness. Every moment offers a chance to choose alignment. Purpose is no longer reserved for grand gestures or defining moments. It is expressed in how you think, how you speak, how you respond. This is why purpose never needed to be found. It was never missing. It was waiting beneath distraction. By knowing yourself, you remove the obstacles that obscured it. What remains is not a role to play, but a way of being. And from that way of being, life unfolds with coherence. You will still experience uncertainty. You will still face challenge. You will still grow. But you will do so from a grounded center rather than a fragmented identity. This is the ultimate purpose: to live consciously, to act from alignment, to create without force, to serve without self-loss, to experience emotion without being ruled by it, to know yourself and live from that knowing. Nothing more is required. Nothing less will satisfy. And when this is understood, not intellectually, but experientially, the question of purpose quietly dissolves. You are no longer asking it. You are living to the answer. Epilogue. You were never lost. By now, it should be clear. You were never without purpose. You were without access. Nothing essential was missing. What was missing was clarity. Clarity obscured by conditioning, false beliefs, emotional reactivity, and externally referenced identity. Once these layers begin to fall away, what remains is not confusion, but coherence. You were never meant to become purposeful. You were meant to remember yourself. Knowing yourself restores inner authority. Emotions no longer dictate your life. Circumstances no longer determine your worth. Meaning no longer rises and falls with outcomes. You move from reaction to response, from fragmentation to alignment. Purpose no longer feels like a question. It feels like a state of being. This does not mean life becomes effortless or free of challenge. It means you are no longer divided within yourself as you meet life. You experience emotion without being ruled by it. You act without needing validation. You serve without losing yourself. Purpose is no longer something you think about. It is something you live. And this living is ongoing. Knowing yourself is not a single realization. It is a relationship. Awareness deepens over time. Layers continue to reveal themselves. But now, you move with clarity instead of confusion, with presence instead of pressure. You no longer ask, "What should I be?" You ask, "What is true?" And from that truth, action follows naturally. The search for purpose ends the moment self-knowledge begins, not because the question was answered, but because it dissolved. You are living the answer now. And that concludes this audiobook version of Know Thyself. Thank you for listening. Please like and share.